Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Growth Execution Podcast. We are here every week to give you some insights, some actionable tips on how to build, launch, and grow your business. Delighted to be joined this week by Aram Melkoumov. Hi, Aram, how are you doing?
Hi, good, Mel. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Indeed, thank you. A real genuine pleasure. Really excited to hear what you've got for us. And now, obviously, what we're doing in this third season is looking very hard at launches. And now I know that you've helped bunches of businesses and have been involved in launches yourself. Tell me, what do you think is the kind of key thing that a business needs in order for a successful launch?
Well, a lot of our businesses that we work with, just from our experience, especially tech companies, I mean, product is pretty critical. You have to have a good intuitive user experience with a great software build behind empowering it. So that's one. Marketing and sales, I think, are the next two. And so with technology these days being kind of quite commoditized in different kind of aspects, I would say that how successful you are in acquiring users, promoting your product, and on closing sales is pretty much the make or break component of your business. So product, in my opinion, these days is starting to fluctuate in priority towards the importance of having a successful marketing and sales strategy.
Fantastic. And I think that's really, really interesting because I think, as you say, things have moved on, haven't they? Product used to be it, right? You used to have to get that absolute smash out of the park concept and then execute on that. And then almost, you would hope the marketing and the sales took care of themselves, right? But now what you're saying is that actually that product side of things can be relatively easily sort of commoditized, as you say. And what do you think is driving that? Is that just kind of knowledge? Is that people sharing different information across time zones, across geographies and copying elsewhere? What's your take on it?
Yeah, I think over time, access to technology, knowledge and know-how has been more widespread than it was 10, 20 years ago. I think in schools at a younger age, children are exposed to programming languages these days. And so, if you start off at an early stage like that, you start to build out that expertise and familiarity with technology. And you get more accustomed to it being part of your day-to-day life as you grow older. And with that abundance, I think technology is so rapidly advancing, and it's taught now in different levels of your journey in your school and then into your early career, that it's not all about what the language is or what the framework is that you use. It's more in terms of, okay, how do I take this product idea that I have and actually use the most readily accessible technology to go and do it. And more and more these days, there's something called the no code movement that is taking off, which allows a non-technical person or a non-programmer to basically go in and create an MVP of a web app, of a mobile app, create a marketing website without knowing how to code or how to design. Yeah. And so with those technologies being so publicly available, it's indifferent in many ways in terms of what approach you take to get where you need to go at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant kind of a summary of almost the generational changes that are happening, right? As perhaps those of us that are a bit older and have dabbled in various different attempts to do coding and tried to build their MVPs any way they could. Actually, now that the kind of no-code movement, as well as you say, is coming in, it makes it very much more straightforward for people to get that launch out. So tell me a bit about your business. Now, Crowdlinker, I know obviously works with a lot of businesses, and I think specifically is focused around helping people to get their products out to the market and to get those sales through.
Yeah, sure. So Crowdlinker, we're an end-to-end digital product innovation firm. We work with companies all over the world, but we're pretty agnostic in terms of the products that we build for them. So we've worked in different industries: fintech, legal tech, e-commerce, media, supply chain logistics. We've done it all. And we take a very different, approach in terms of how we look at product development. We always try to start off with a discovery, which is our strategy side of our service, where we really try to understand, is the problem there, first of all, before we sink any more of our clients' time and money into a software build or a product build of any sort. It's so like, hey, let's go and see, is there a real problem here that requires a solution? And more often than not, you'd be surprised that some of the things that we come across either exist or there isn't a strong enough differentiator. So we need to assess with the client whether or not we should continue down that path. So in my opinion, I think where we really try to help educate the clients, whether they're early stage startups or whether they're like enterprise companies and we're working with their innovation teams, is there a real need? And is there enough of a differentiator to put a product out there in the market that would actually be successful? And so we go about this different ways. We do a lot of market research, competitor research. We go and try to find those users that are going to be the end customers and speak to them. And there's tons of platforms out there these days where we could get access to them and do customer development and spend time with them and see and assess whether or not a tool or a product does or doesn't exist in their tool set already that they use on a day-to-day basis, and whether there is a problem there before we present a solution. And then kind of when that exercise is done, then we go and we validated the idea. We believe that there is a need. We go through a design phase where we do design sprints, create some prototypes, create some MVPs, and go back to speak to those clients. And we try to get them involved in the whole product journey together with us. So what I mean by that is once we do the customer development phase and we get a rapport, we get a relationship going with these users, we try to be objective in this relationship and try not to include the client too much to muddy the waters. But we try to basically have those potential users or prospects involved in the wireframe stage, in the mock-up, in the UI stage, and we present them our progression. And then that way they have skin in the game. They have like a vested interest actually in the success of this product, which they're going to use. And once we do the design, then we go obviously to the software build, where we actually do the software engineering behind the product and back-end, DevOps, front-end, cloud architecture, all that kind of stuff.
Okay, brilliant. So I mean, that is truly sort of immersed in and vested, I guess, for yourselves in how this kind of turns out. Do you find, so there's a couple of questions that arise out of that. Number one is, how many times do you come, or what percentage of time do you come across ideas that just aren't going to go? So if there was 100 companies that come to you guys and say, right, this is what we want to do, do you have a notion roughly of what sort of, how often you have to guide them against?
So I've unfortunately had to come across this quite a few times. I would say between 100 companies, as an example, I would say 15 to 20% of those we end up having to stop or explain to them that the idea that they came up with either is not feasible technically, it's not viable as a product idea from a business standpoint. And there's obviously like no market need for it. Ultimately the reason that we do this is to make sure that we build something that's actually needed, and then the client actually has something that actually the market wants and the customers are willing to pay with their hard-earned cash, right? But at the end of our discovery phases, we actually always find either a pivot that we can present to the client, or if there is no pivot and there's no other opportunity, then we're like, okay, like we should stop here, or let's not continue.
Because that was going to be my next question, was right for those, if the why is strong enough, right? If this drive for that entrepreneur to get to that other stage is so strong, then perhaps it's just not quite the right audience, or perhaps it's not quite the right product, but the entrepreneur must, there's still that drive there. So iteration and pivoting are basically solutions potentially to that.
Yeah, and like it's sometimes hard for those entrepreneurs if they're startup founders for the first time. or maybe they're a multiple time serial entrepreneur. It's like, we got to act as that reasoning wall, or that objective kind of partner, because many times there's always that innovator's dilemma issue where they go down this path and they're like so fixated on this idea, this concept, and unfortunately they didn't go and do that customer development. They didn't go speak to those customers. And we've been in a couple situations that we've learned from that this happened. And it was painful for us and for them, because we recommended a path to take of ultimate least resistance down the long road, but they were adamant about doing it. And there's only so much we could do at the end of the day, right? As a consultancy,
there's like, advice, and strong advice,
right?
You can't stop them.
We can't stop them. And like, unfortunately, in all those situations, we were always right. And it's a lesson learned for, I think, anybody building a business. It's okay, well, I learned this, now I'm going to do better next time. And unfortunately, it's just sometimes in those situations, it's not something that you can teach. It's something you have to go through. And there's just no way around it. Like, everybody has to walk their own path as an entrepreneur. And so most of the entrepreneurs I know, they probably had 1, 2 failed attempts, and then the third, fourth time they actually make it work. So like, statistically, I think that's what I've seen so far as a success rate as an entrepreneur. Like I've done it 3 times, failed, 4th time worked. So
and we've discussed before exactly that. There's this kind of idea of failure being along the journey rather than the end.
That's right.
And I think that's really important for people who are starting out, perhaps who are starting out again, or perhaps who are starting out again. This is something that is, the lessons you learn in that process, that failure process, are almost the ones that are the hardest one and the most important, because they don't, you don't learn those things in school. Nobody teaches you that stuff. That's the thing that you only get from the hard yards.
That's right. And I actually went to school, and I have a degree in entrepreneurship, and that was my educational background. And the first 3 years are all theory. The last year is a practice, and I had to create a company and stuff like that. But after graduating, I spent 3 years building an e-commerce startup, and I learned more doing that than I did in my entire education history.
Really?
And I don't think there's any school, from what I know, that really puts practice first instead of theory. And I mean, obviously, you need the theory along the way. Like, you got to learn how to do accounting and finance and run your books, and make sure that the company can sustain itself. But at the end of the day, like, I would love to see more universities or colleges adopt more of a practical approach and split it between 50-50 between theory and practice.
And just kind of be there, sort of underpinning it as people go off and experience their, like you say, live their truth, understand what it takes to do this for them, rather than necessarily from a book or from a lecture. I think that's so true.
Exactly.
And I think you're absolutely right. Learning those things about finance and all those sorts of things are very important for those listening who are starting out, and are not perhaps au fait with all those sorts of things. There is you can outsource that, right? You can get some expertise in for the things that you haven't got a clue about.
Exactly.
Yeah, I did as well, from the product development perspective, people such as Crowdlinker who are going to be able to help them to do that side of things as well. One more thing on the product side, you said about getting people to, or getting potential prospects, potential customers to help out on that and to be vested in it. There's that great quote from Henry Ford that says, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Which I just, and there is a downside to asking too much, isn't there, of potential customers, because they will, within their own kind of experience and remit, that they will probably try and guide you by committee to somewhere that perhaps isn't right.
Yeah, and like, it's customer development is something that's actually hard to do correctly, because oftentimes what I've seen is when you're speaking to those customers, often what people do is they present them with the solution, and then they ask whether that solution is going to work for them. And you're basically then giving them what you want them to hear, but you don't know if that really is the right problem that they're looking for. And so what I would always recommend is, start off with surveys, find those people, reach out to them. From those surveys, people who responded back, reach out to them, do a second stage discovery where it's like a 30-minute conversation. Don't mention anything about the solution, just talk about the problems. Like how are they doing X? Where are they finding their biggest issues around Y and Z? Like, you just keep it open-ended and just ask questions and just shut up and listen. And I think that's the one thing I always want to tell people is that stop talking. And in these customer development interviews, oftentimes what I see is the CEO is trying to sell and is trying to put those people down a path towards his own benefit.
Absolutely.
And you're basically screwing yourself by doing this kind of approach. And just listen and take notes and speak to, I would recommend, my number that I always like to get to is like 15 to 20 as a sample size of people.
Useful.
I think 5 is a little bit too little. 10 is okay, it's just the minimum, but my ideal is 15 to 20 people in your target audience that you want to have as a client base. And then just spend time doing sense making. And that could take time, right? You're trying to find all the results that came back, look at all your notes, assess where's the commonality, and then go back and maybe ask more clarifying questions about what do you mean by that? Or, can you expand on this? And again, just shut up and listen to what they tell you. You'd be surprised how much they tell you.
Yeah, particularly if it's a really burning problem and you've actually hit a nerve for them. And you're right, it is so difficult for entrepreneurs, I think, to hear challenging feedback. And again, we've spoken before about being told that your baby is ugly. That's really hard.
It's hard.
People just get very, very emotional and defensive and angry and all those other emotions about it. So having someone like Crowdlinker involved who's a little bit more independent, I guess, just gives them that space and that distance. And I imagine you've become very adept at translating some of the more punchy feedback into something a bit more digestible, right?
Yeah. It's like you hit it exactly. Like, entrepreneurs are very emotionally attached to their ideas, their businesses, and it's sometimes very hard for them to hear the reality of it. They're sometimes living in a dream world, in a false reality, thinking that what they have is what is needed. And so it requires finesse and massaging it a bit to kind of get them towards the right path that they need to go. And this happens in enterprises as well. It's not just startups. Like, I was amazed to see in an enterprise organization how this is a problem as well. And ideas come from the top instead of the bottom. Some of the companies that we've spoken to have a great approach where they go bottom up, and their customer service people or whoever they are the ones speaking to the customers. They're the ones who bring the ideas and the issues to the top, and then solutions are created around those, right? But the worst is an enterprise that has an innovation mindset, who has the title of we are an innovation first company, or they do that checkbox of we do innovation, but the innovation comes from the CEOs or whoever they are, and it lands on deaf ears when it gets to the middle or the bottom of the organization, because they're like, that's not a problem. This is the problem that our customers are telling us.
It's just not a problem, and that is so important that and again, we obsess here at Groshen about problem solving. You've got to have that problem, you've got to be able to articulate it, and it's got to be something that you're performing on a day-to-day basis. Moving from the product side, absolutely, and I think that the way that you guys organize that, I think is really sound. But marketing and sales, are two of our other kind of favorite topics, obviously here, and I know for you guys as well. How do you is it possible to market away product problems?
So it's market away product problems.
And by problem, sorry, let me just be a lot clearer. So if that product market, if a product doesn't fit the market, can you get enough of a good kind of advertising campaign behind it to overcome it?
You can. I'm sure there is ways to do it. And so like from what I've seen, my rule of thumb is if a product costs, say 100K to build, okay? Depending on the industry, obviously, but I would always recommend everybody to have at least 2 times that for budget, if not more, towards marketing.
Okay.
And obviously if it's a hardware product or something physical like that, then yeah, that's the type of budget you need. But if it's a software product, there are different hacks and tools to do it. There's like things like Product Hunt, where you could put it on there. There's startup communities you could go to. There's incubators and accelerators that you could partner up with to get them to pilot your products, which are a lot more cost effective. But from a marketing standpoint, if you did your customer development process well, your first customers should be the ones that you spoke to initially.
Yeah.
Once you figured out all the kinks and problems with it along the way when you're building out your MVP, and try to keep it as close to your original problem statement that you're trying to solve. Like I always I heard this before actually, so I'm going to steal this. So some people, MVP, minimal viable product.
Yeah.
I've heard people say, think of it as a minimal marketable product instead, or a product that has a minimal viable job that it does. And I've seen so many times that when you do an MVP or whatever you want to call it, it has too much functionality and you're not focusing on like what it's trying to solve. Yeah. And if you market, oftentimes from a sales and marketing standpoint, what your MVP does in a very niche focus or a very specific audience subset, you'd be surprised how the results can come out of that. Because first identify how your product is solving that minimal marketable issue or problem statement, and then once you solve that, you'd be surprised how everything else kind of has a domino effect after that.
Right.
It comes all in line accordingly once you have a core product that solves a core problem doing one thing well.
Yeah. And by surprising, you mean surprising in a positive way. So it's actually the
more
surprising way, almost the more narrow you go in with this very specific thing that you are doing, then out of that can grow a broader product or a kind of more rounded product, right?
Yeah, exactly, right. And just like keeping it really, really focused and simple, like the whole KISS concept, keep it simple, stupid, and I've seen when that process is followed and it's attractive to the users because, exactly what I need to solve and your product does this exceptionally well.
And it
doesn't do everything else well, but it speaks to me. And from a marketing standpoint, that's where the whole network effect can come in, and referrals and word of mouth. We've seen word of mouth campaigns be a lot more effective when it takes a grassroots approach from a marketing standpoint as an MVP than in other scenarios where you just do a blast of marketing and a broadcast, and it just falls on deaf ears, and you're basically just throwing crap against the window and seeing what sticks. It's not focused. Yeah,
I so agree. And you're right. I think if you get people's buy-in and people's passion and commitment to it, and they see you as one of them, almost as kind of like, this person, this business really gets me. And now more than ever, I think, people are it's kind of hyper local, it's hyper personal, isn't it? You want products with the people that, or as an individual, you want products that really resonate with you and do things that you see as a challenge in your life. And I think that's so true. It's absolutely, you've got to get that marketing right where it does sit with people and they tell their mates, and then their mates tell their mates, and then those communities that spring up everywhere, little groups, can be dozens of people rather than hundreds or thousands, but that's the heart of the beating heart of your product result.
That's so true. And it just made me think of I'd rather have 100 really great power users who love the product and use it than 1,000 people who don't use it the right way or don't, it's like an afterthought for them. It's
that's right.
Because those 100 core users that are using it every day, it starts to become a necessity for them. And then it's kind of like as a good comparison, like when Slack started out, there was nothing really as successful at the market, and they just really focused on like a simple thing, getting people to communicate.
Yeah.
And look at the grassroots marketing referral program that came out of that. Like they didn't do any marketing.
No,
it was all driven through referrals or word of mouth. And it's like going back to what I was saying, it's like it was a very simple product at the time.
Yeah.
It was basically like ICQ, if you remember ICQ, but for teams, for companies.
Exactly that. And the passion of the users was such that they had to tell everybody else about it. And that's and people like them then went, that is amazing. And then off it went. So I think about from the marketing side, I think it's so true to focus in on your needs. From the sales side then, what is it that really makes, say, kind of or gets that product into the right hands and gets people buying it? That's the really critical piece, right? There's the revenue side. At the end of the day, we've all got to make some money. So what have you seen that kind of really helps out from the sales side?
So I've seen different types of strategies done for early stage companies where they offer some sort of a sales incentive for somebody to participate in a pilot. So like, if it's a SaaS company, it's like, participate in our beta and then you get 6 months off when we launch production. And this is like the value you're going to get. Or I always, SaaS is a great business, but I think the annual commitments from a subscription standpoint are great, because then you have customers locked in and you have that recurring kind of like a user base, in your company.
I've seen a lot of those actually recently, more interested. So there used to be these monthly fees you could pay that were slightly higher than the annual, but now almost it just says £70 or $70 a month, brackets if you pay annually, and it doesn't even give you the monthly option anymore. And I think you're right, it locks people in, doesn't it, to an extent, and gets them using it.
It's not just that it gets them using it, but from what I heard from other CEOs is that it becomes very hard for them to then like leave, because if you're in an annual contract and the product works to your liking, the first year you're very likely to just renew it.
Yeah.
Right. Unless like the product is a total disaster or your customer service is or whatever. There's obviously so many factors to consider, but often than not in an enterprise SaaS, it's you're most likely to get a renewal the first year. The second year you got to fight for that one. But I from a recurring revenue standpoint, from a sales perspective, like investors look at those type of factors more so than anything else, because they want to see a retainment of your customers and like the annual revenue. There's a lot of companies a lot of startups actually from a fintech perspective that got created, which actually fund your annual revenue upfront based on your projections. Right. So that helps with cash flow, and then you don't have to go get dilutive funding. It's non-dilutive in this case.
Got it.
I thought that was quite interesting. And then you could just take that money and just reapply it towards product or more sales initiatives.
Got it.
But I mean, sales at the end of the day, I'm sure you know this and believe this. It's like it is the blood of a business.
Couldn't agree more.
It's
absolutely is. It's so important, and it's something that I think many entrepreneurs don't really get to grips with early enough.
Yeah, like you have to try to get people to buy your product as early as possible, even if it's in a beta, and say, hey, does this really trying to identify with them and saying, hey, I have this idea, this is the MVP, use it, and then I want you to know how much you would pay me for it. It's like start there. It's like, how much of this, how valuable is this product for you, and how much would you pay for it?
Yeah.
And just like listen, it's like, oh, okay, well, I'll pay you $10 a month. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
What do 10 other people say? And you'd be surprised how many people actually help you as a business, because if the value is there and it solves a problem for it, they'd be happy to pay for it.
Absolutely. And if that number is lower than you thought or you wanted it to be, then work out what you can take out of the product, or, make sure that you're still delivering the value piece, and have that conversation with them and say, all right,
Yeah.
it costs me $50 to make this, or $30, whatever. What if, in order to get it down to 10, if I took this out and this out and this out, would it still deliver the same kind of value?
Yeah. Or the other way, what would you want more in the product in order to pay my $50 SaaS fee a month or whatever?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then just listen to them and create a roadmap around it, but lock them in to say, okay, I'll give you a discount for the first 6 months, but start paying me, and then I'll have this out in 3 to 6 months in the product.
Yeah. And there's something about that moment when that first customer buys as well, right? Which is like, because that's when your idea becomes a business, and it's so important.
Exactly. It's euphoric. Yeah,
correct.
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely right. That's what everybody listening to this should be aiming for, right? That moment. Brilliant. Listen, I could chat for hours. I'm loving the conversation around. Thank you so much for your time. Just a couple of very quick questions, if I may, just before we have to go. So, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received as an entrepreneur?
Build out a great team around you that can support you during the highs and lows. It's, at the end of the day, I'm just one person. I've learned that at times I had the wrong people, involved, that, it kind of set me back a bit. And then over time, I got better in terms of seeing what are my strengths, what are my weaknesses, bringing in the team to support my weaknesses, and, really starting to focus and zone in on what I'm good at. So you got to learn to fire yourself from the stuff that's taking up your time. You can't be a jack of all trades when you're starting to grow your business. And you got to learn when to disengage and go focus on strategy. And one more thing that a very wise serial entrepreneur told me was, when I came to him and I said, I'm having all these issues, I'm doing all these things. And after reflection, he's like, I think the problem that you have is that you're working in your business too much. You should be working on your business. And when he said that, I'm like, oh my God, you're so right. I'm just always working in my business, like the day to day, like everything. It's I got my head down too much in it, and I never have a chance to look up and say, okay, what's going on? Like, am I doing the right thing?
What's over there?
what's over there? How do I get there?
Yeah.
And strategize in terms of, okay, like, what do I need to do and change in my strategy or my team to get there? Last piece is, I highly recommend people getting coaches, whether that's personal or business coaches. It helped me. I had one for about a year, and it helped me analyze the good and the bad in my life and work on my bad things that I had and perfect the good things that I had to be more well-rounded and sharper as a person.
Yeah, I agree. I've had a coach myself as well for about the same length of time, and absolutely, it's the aside from the business side, yes, understanding all the business things as well, but also getting deep into you and what your strengths and weaknesses are. And like you said just earlier on about firing yourself, I love that idea. Just don't actually sit there and go, no, I'm really terrible at that. Just get rid of it, get somebody else in, and know yourself. Exactly. And know your strengths and weaknesses. Fantastic.
Exactly.
Listen,
and you can't be perfect, right? So,
well, you're absolutely right. People try, but at the end of the day, you will be found out. That's brilliant. Aram, thanks so much. Really great insights there around everything to do with building your business, launching your business. How can people get in touch with you if they want
to? They could reach out to me by sending me an email at aram at crowdlinker.com, or just going on our website and submitting a contact form. It all goes to me. So I'll be the one responding to everybody. And there's a lot of great content on our social media, on LinkedIn, that we're also posting about how to build better products, lessons learned from other people, product leaders, CEOs. So there's tons of content that I think your listeners would also find very, very valuable.
There really is. I couldn't recommend it enough. There's so much information in there. You should really go and check it out. Aram, thanks again very much indeed for your time today. Really good to catch up. that's been the Growth Execution Podcast. Thank you guys as well for listening in. Really great to have you along. We'll be back again next week with some more growth execution tips and tricks and all about launching your business. If you're ready now to go out and get yourself into this whole environment of launching your business, I wish you all the very best. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch up again soon.